And hello there, and welcome to another episode of Ohana Hobby Workshop. You're joined by myself, Mango Smasher, and today we are going to be doing something slightly different. We're going to be doing a podcast slash talk about first impressions to Warhammer 9th Edition for first players. Obviously, today I am not alone. I am joined by a special guest who goes by the name of Ross876 underscore on Twitch. So we'll bring him in and we'll say hi. So there we go, Ross. So we're all up and going. So,
Right, okay. Hello, everyone.
so obviously, I'm aware that recently that you played a game of 9th Edition, and I believe it was your first game.
Yeah, my very first game with my dad.
Okay. So obviously, as I also know, you got the recruit edition for the starter set.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So basically, so what we're gonna do is just talk about like how you found it and essentially like any sort of things you would adapt or possibly change. Obviously this is all opinion based as well. Because it is a discussion just as much as a podcast. So if we take so the recruit box then so for pricing, do you think it's a fair price for people to get into ninth edition with, or do you think they could have included anything else?
So, speaking about the Recruit Edition, I think it's a perfect way of getting new players into Warhammer. Personally, I believe that it has all the things to get started and it gives you the most for your money. Um, gives you 20 miniatures, plenty to start playing games, a rule book, a gaming mat, some dice and rulers. So pretty much everything you need.
Okay, then. So obviously as well. So over in the UK, the recruit edition is £32.50. It does come with a bit of scenery as well. So I'm guessing the scenery from the looks of things, because I'm currently looking at it now. I'm guessing that's the actual main box it comes in,
Yes.
if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So then obviously you've got it all like built and painted, and you're now sort of like in your first game. Did you dive straight into it, or did you have a quick little flick through the rules, or how did you go about starting your first game and introduction into ninth edition?
So so we set up and we flicked a little bit through the rules to kind of get to know the game and stuff. And we found some of the stuff to be a little bit confusing at times, especially the charging um,
Hmm.
and the pile up
Hmm.
for the scarabs. Um, but overall, the movement phase was pretty easy to understand, and so was the shooting phase. Pretty much self-explanatory. You look at the ballistic skill on your
Hmm.
data sheets. You roll if it lands on the number that the ballistic skill is, you got shot. And
Hmm.
but overall, I think that the rulebook does a good job of explaining the basic premises
Hmm.
of the game, although it does not include some of the phases,
Okay.
such as the psyching phase and the command phase.
Hmm. Okay, and so would you like say as obviously as an opinion based decision, would you say it would be nice to sort of have it all, so like all the phases, so your command phase, your movement, your psychic, your shoot, and your charge, your fight phase, and your morale phase, all in that one little guide, or do you think the way the guide's set out specifically for the recruit edition is a good way to start, so it would entice you to buy the full rule book?
Well, considering that you don't have any psychers in the Recre edition, I think that psyching phase is not really important at the time. Uh, but if you're planning on investing more into the hobby, of course, then I would recommend uh, getting the full rule book, the core book, um, and stuff.
Okay. Um,
But
oh, go on.
it, but I think the recruit manual has pretty much all the phases that are
Mm,
necessary.
mm. So obviously, like, when you had your first game, I'm not sure if you used, because from what you said, there wasn't the command phase in the book. So I'm guessing, um, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't get a chance to really take advantage of like command points and like all the extra sort of stuff.
Yeah, not really. Well, we played through the first and second missions, and that introduced us to the movement, the shooting phase, the charging and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And later on, it kind of expands the other phases, like the morale phase, and that's about it.
Okay, so you've mentioned about there being missions in the Recruit Edition. So I'm currently looking at the rule book now, and there's missions in here as well. There's quite a few. So would you say the missions are a good sort of learning curve for starting into it? Or would you say like just going in heads in and sort of coming up with your own mission to start with, essentially. So is it easier to have the missions there, or for someone starting in ninth edition, would it be easier for them to make up a mission?
Well, considering the missions are set up in a way that so the first three missions teach you all the phases, and then the fourth mission kinda makes you put in all the stuff you learn out onto the
Hmm.
table and kind of test out your skills that you've learned over the last three missions. And I think the missions are a great way to teach new players.
Hmm. Okay, so if we uh, go from there, sort of thing, would you have liked to seen like more maybe missions involved in the book, like a few more, or like a little narrative mission inside the Recruit Edition, or do you think the missions that are in there are good for a start point, or would you have liked to see more?
Personally, I would have liked to see a bit more missions because you tend to go through those missions like very quickly. I think you can go through them in about a matter of 5 hours.
Hmm.
Um, so it would be nice to see more missions added. But then again, it is the budget option
Hmm.
for people, so I don't expect a lot to be in here.
And I think that's one of the things that GW do quite a lot. And I'm not sure if you agree with that. Because like obviously you've got the Recruit Edition, you've then got like your middle tier Elite that has a few more units in, and then obviously you have your Command that has the rule book and terrain and stuff like that. Do you feel obviously like the prices are spot on with how they've done it from starting essentially we'll call this kid Bill. So little Billy, essentially he's asked his dad. They haven't got a lot of money. They can't afford like the bigger one, but they can afford the smaller one. Um, do you think that's a smart tactic? Whereas consumer market sort of thing. So doing the three editions essentially. If I try and simplify it, do you think having the three sort of the essentially low tier, middle tier, high tier, sort of into ninth edition is a good system?
Yes, because the three different box sets are aimed at a different audience. So the Recre Edition is aimed at people who would want to get into Warhammer with little to no investment,
Hmm.
to kind of try out the hobby before they fully invest into the
Hmm.
plastic crack addiction.
Yeah.
Um, and whereas the Elite Edition is the middle tier, so I
Hmm.
think is like the middle ground for pretty much. I would say it's the perfect starter set.
Hmm.
It has a bit more miniatures. It has an extended rule book, and I think considering it's £65,
Yeah.
if you were to buy those miniatures on their own, you would pay, I would say, over £100 easily.
Um, yeah. If we were to do a rough estimation of a breakdown, your assault marines would probably be about 20-25 your standard like Primaris box. Your Necron warriors would be the same characters, around about 20 each, and then obviously the bikes would be a bit more, so you're probably looking at about 25-30, and the connected destroyers would be around about the same sort of price as well. So you are saving quite a bit from buying this one box. I think it is a massive thing. Um, Especially for obviously if you don't have a lot of money as well, but you want like something to like kickstart um, going through as well. So what would your opinions be on the Command Edition? Because obviously it comes with all of the stuff from the Elite Edition, but it has like the extra scenery in. Do you think that's a nice touch with how they've done that set, or would you prefer like more miniatures than terrain?
Well, so the terrain is, I would say you can make your own terrain,
Mm,
which again could be a lot cheaper.
mhm,
But I think the Command Edition, what it does well is it provides the rule book
mm,
and the command manual.
mm.
And so, but I think the terrain is not really necessary because you can use like some DIY terrain, like boxes and stuff.
Yeah.
And I think they could cut the price down, perhaps by removing the terrain and adding a little bit more miniatures.
Mm. And I think that's like one of the biggest things as well. Like one of the things you touched on earlier was like depending how invested you want to get into it depends on sort of the price you pay. Um, so because I know that you've not dived into it, um, but obviously like with talks we've had like during days and streams and stuff, you've only just sort of like dibble you're sort of you're not tiptoeing in it anymore. You're putting your foot in, sort of thing, and find your depth. So do you feel that now you're learning a bit more about the rules and hobbies? Can you see yourself getting like fully into like an army or like going sort of like to events and stuff like that? Like what would be your sort of like if you had an end goal, we'll call it, on where you want to be in like a year, 2 years time, with the hobby, like where would you like to be? Is there anything you want to achieve, or even if it's as simple as just having like a large army or something like that? So what would be like your sort of long-term goals?
My long-term goal would be uh, expanding my Necron army,
Hmm.
making it massive.
Hmm.
Because obviously I'm a fan of Necrons. I think they are just
Mm.
amazing. Um, but I think in my 2 year period, as you said, I would want
Mm.
to perhaps get into playing a bit of tournaments,
Hmm.
um, perhaps meeting other hobbyists from around the country or around the
Mm.
globe,
Hmm.
kind of meeting up with them, speaking about the hobby and everything, and stuff.
Hmm. Um, so essentially like so that we touched on like events and stuff like that. So would you say that like going to Nottingham, visit their head office, and going around the exhibits and obviously checking out the Black Library, Forge World, and like having a game in essentially even if it's just a game with friends and not in a tournament setting, say like having a game and spending a weekend at like Warhammer World would be definitely something in the seeable future. Obviously, once all the pandemic and stuff's over with.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It would be honestly an amazing experience just going to Warhammer World, um, checking out all the different exhibitions and stuff,
Mm,
um, and just kind of getting more familiar with the lore and the whole universe in general.
mm,
Because Warhammer can be very overwhelming at times, especially with all the stuff that's currently
mm,
happening. But I think the most important thing is taking it bit by bit and kind of setting small goals for yourself
mhm,
on your journey.
mhm. So would you say like so if we were to say if we were to like take what you've said there, it's like if there was like any sort of advice that you would give either someone that's just starting or whether they're like nervous about it, like what sort of like advice or like steps we'll call it would you give them to sort of help the transition into the hobby a bit easier? Because it that I as a hobbyist has been in for 17 years, nearly 18 years now. When I first joined, it was very daunting. You were worried about like messing up models and not being able to paint them and build them properly. So what would be your advice for someone out there who was just getting into it, or whether it was parents like bringing their kids into the hobby? What would be like your main bits of advice that you would give that person?
So talking about advice, I would say that the people that are getting in, they should definitely get involved with the community because the community has been very helpful to me. Um, they've always supported me. They've always told me what to do better and where things I've done wrong. And just I would say just keep a cool head. Um, take it bit by bit. If something which you do doesn't go the way you want it, just take a break, cool down, sit back down, and try to correct your mistakes and go over it.
So would you say like so if we use Billy for an example again, painting up his first miniature, is they're brand new to the hobby, straight into it. They've got the recruit edition we use as well as an example. They start panicking because maybe they've made their paint too watery or it's gone on too thick. Like, would you say like the best sort of advice then would be just to take a step back and have a little breather, or maybe asking if they're in a club or like a games workshop, maybe asking some like people around there and interacting with them to get advice. Would you say that's a good way to go?
Yeah, interaction is really important
Mm,
with the community because they are very helpful. And uh and also don't expect yourself to paint your first miniature like you see other people paint them. For example,
mm,
if we take the box art, the miniatures on there, they are painted by professionals.
mm,
And now of course if you're just starting out, there is no way you're going to be painting them at
mm,
that level.
mm.
So
S-
I think what you should do is you should not expect yourself to do well, but at
mhm.
the same time don't expect yourself to do bad.
Okay, so essentially, like, don't have high expectations, but don't have low. So just go into it with a clear mind, essentially.
Yeah, pretty much.
So obviously as well, like, we've touched on also terrain as well from the sets as well, and you mentioned the DIY, so like do it yourself. Would you say alongside like maybe getting into the hobby, like would you say terrain, doing it your like DIY jobs is another way to bring yourself into the hobby uh, without spending money to go to like get recruit editions and stuff. So do you think that you can get into the hobby via just doing scenery or miniatures, or do you think it's one-sided, or can you use both to get access to it?
Yeah, absolutely. Even if it's terrain or if you just buy like a single miniature off eBay with like the most minimum investment possibly you can go. I think that's another way of getting into the hobby because again, you're still paying the miniatures, or you're doing the terrain. It's still part of the hobby, I would say.
Mm,
And what's most important about this hobby is finding out things which work best for you
mm,
and like kind of what sector you're best at. So some people may be good at painting miniatures, some people may be good at making terrain and stuff, or
mm,
like game boards. But I think the most important thing is finding out what you're good at, and I
mm.
think you should stick to it.
Okay, so like, so if we go on from that, so like finding sort of like your comfortable zone when you first start, essentially. Then, and then, so if someone was to come to you and say, hey, they want to try a new skill, but they're concerned about it, and they just started, and sort of like they've got a good base ground, like if you could give someone any bit of advice for if they're like worrying about trying something new, whether it's as simple as like a dry brush or highlighting, what would be sort of like your advice or like words of encouragement, would call it, or really to help them, whether it can be simple as just saying, yeah, like have a go at it, or but like what would be your opinion or like the advice you would give if someone asked you about a new technique they wanted to learn. What would be your essentially your advice for them to proceed and get into that technique?
So if they want to try out a new technique, I'll perhaps recommend them to go watch guides on
Hmm.
it, on how to do it, and just kind of try it out themselves, see how they do, follow the guide, of course, and if it turns out the way they like it, then hey, do it.
Another thing as well, because I know we touched on like if you make a mistake, do you think also maybe making those mistakes, whether they're essentially like a good mistake where it's a happy accident, or a bad mistake, do you think that's a massive learning curve for someone that's just starting, or even for veterans, like such as myself that's been in the hobby for a long time? Do you think making mistakes is a good thing rather than not making mistakes?
I will say mistakes are very important in your Warhammer journey, and that's because if you do make a mistake, then you can think of ways to avoid that mistake next time and how to fix that mistake. And mostly humans learn from their mistakes, and so mistakes are a very important part of our education in things.
Mm. And I think that's one of like the main things, especially for obviously such as like yourself that's just coming into the hobby, and I think for other people as well. Um, not like it's always going to be there. I think no matter how long you've been in the hobby, to do with you're going to make a mistake, but being able to sort of not so much accept the mistake, but so much as learning from it. Because I know one of the things as well, like this hobby is constantly changing. So there's probably so you've painted up your recruit edition. I'm pretty there's I want to say I'm pretty sure that you've learned some new skills. So like, how did you find painting up your essentially not so much your first box, but your first like sort of like starter box? How did you like find that, and like what how did you come about by like getting yourself prepped and stuff and all of the goodiness that comes with it?
Painting up my first box, I've learned dry brushing,
Mm.
um, which of course it helps bring out the details on your miniatures and makes them stand out. And so I think with dry brushing, with what I learned, I think I can improve it even further and make my other miniatures in the future look way better than what they are.
Mm.
Um,
So so do you feel that that is there like something you would do differently next time, or is there like you mentioned about like the dry brushing, would there is there do you reckon there's room for improvement, or maybe finding a a sort of a more of a better way to get a certain effect? So essentially, like, what's the main thing would be actually, like, what would be your opinion on dry brushing? Do you think it's a bad skill to learn, or like a good skill, or what's your thoughts around the whole like dry brushing?
uh, Dry brush, well, it's easy to learn. Essentially, you get a brush,
Mm.
you dip in paint, and then you rub as much paint off of the brush as you can, and so it leaves like small amount of paint, and then just go over the miniature, and then the paint tends to stay on the most elevated points of the miniature where the light tends to shine upon, and but I definitely think there is loads of room for improvement
Mm.
and things. Because when I first did dry brushing, I tend to go a bit overboard with the amount of paint,
Mm.
and so I kind of covered up my base coating a little bit,
Hmm.
and so you could just only see my dry brushing and not as much as my base colors.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing, especially like learning where about mistakes sort of thing we'll call it. You've learned that maybe you need to take a bit more brush off, maybe go a bit more gentler, and that's the main thing about this hobby. Like everyone's learning, we all learn at different speeds, whether you've just started or you're a veteran. Um, but yeah, so that will be the episode for today, people. So as again, we were joined by Ross876. Their Twitch will be in the link down in the description. If you did enjoy this podcast slash chat, please consider hitting that subscribe button and liking the video. It does go a long way, and we do our best to reply to all comments. And if you have any suggestions, pop them down in the comment section. But thank you for joining on this one, Ross. It's been much
Yeah,
appreciated.
absolutely. Always a pleasure. And one more thing before
Yep.
we do end, I would like to say that you should enjoy yourself as much as you can with the hobby. Honestly, it's such an amazing opportunity for people.
Hmm. Um, but yeah, that's really good words there. But yeah, so if you did enjoy the content, consider giving us a like and subscribe, and we will join you guys on another episode of Ohana Hobby Workshop, and we shall catch you all on that one.